Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the GCNC Worldview podcast. It's great to have you all here. For folks who have followed over the last several months, you know that I have been traveling the world solely digitally, haven't really been out much, but finally back on the road and recording from Lima, Peru, where the GCNC is getting ready to host our Andean Cannabis and Hemp Trade Forum at the end of this week. So we've been talking a lot to folks down here about the expanding South American market and what's happening in particular in Peru with their recent hemp laws, changes in their medicinal laws, and the potential in the not too distant future for adult use. It's coming up on the 17th, 18th, and 19th, so still time to hop on that transatlantic flight or come down from North America to check out. I checked it just the other day, so still great opportunities there. But as most of you also know, between North America, South America, and Europe, there is a lot going on. Lot of trade route opportunities opening, import and export discussions, as well as different domestic expansion opportunities. And we haven't talked a lot in recent months about what's going on in the UK. And I was there over the summer for Cannabis Europa, started talking to Rifhat Jubeenh at that point about perhaps recording a podcast to talk about what's happening there. She's with Fontus Health. And she also asked that perhaps we invite Paul North, director at Volteface, to join us. And so that's what we're doing. It's taken us a few attempts to get this on the books and scheduled, but I'm really happy that we've been able to do it. Thanks, guys, so much for joining me today from across the ocean.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. You know, so that we can sort of set the table here for the discussion, why don't you guys give a little bit of your backgrounds and what you're currently working on over there, because we've got a lot to talk about. The medicinal market over in the UK has been growing, but slowly. There's certainly other discussions about opportunities there with the rest of mainland Europe. But Rifhat, why don't we start with you and tell us who you are and what you're up to?
Rifhat, did we meet back in Berlin, Chris? It was a while back.
Yeah, I think the first time was through our partnership with ICBC in Berlin. Yep,
Yeah,
that's
and then we met at Cannabis Europa. I think we shared a kebab in Hoxton, I believe.
yes,
A meal,
that's
should
right.
I?
The best
Yeah.
conversations, everybody, always happen after hours, eating kebabs and drinking fruit juice, for sure.
Exactly. So just to give you a bit of background, I work at Fontus Health, which is a mid-sized pharmaceutical company, have a background in buying for global brands, 65 plus stores, budgets of around 85 million a quarter. Have been in this medical CBD space for the last 3-4 years, I would say. And most recently, last year, met with Paul, and we started talking about the medical cannabis market in the UK and how that looked. And I think there was something really interesting about there was definitely a single point of truth in terms of our vision for the future of medical cannabis in the UK and where it is at the moment. And so we've been sort of dissecting the whole market over the last sort of 6 to 8 months. And then I joined Volteface, Paul. Has it been 2-3 months now? And so
It's about 2 months, yeah.
Yeah, I've been doing a bit of work sort of behind the scenes for the All Parliamentary Group, but also supporting Volteface and what they're doing, looking at different sort of the way the UK market landscape is at the moment and global opportunity. So that's me.
Perfect. And Paul, how about you?
Yeah, so thanks for having us on, Chris. I've been around in the space since 2017. I've worked at Volteface now, for like coming on 7 years, and seen the market really change, evolve, and grow since those early foundations in 2018. And Volteface has played numerous roles over that time. Originally in 2017, we were a think tank funded by philanthropic donation, and we ran one of the campaigns that had a big impact on the UK government changing its position. And since that time, I've spent countless hours speaking to MPs, journalists, third sector advocacy organisations, influencers, about how they can appropriately engage in the medical cannabis sector. And I think the UK is interesting. I think a lot of people will look at Europe and get really excited by Germany and excited outside of Europe by countries which are very proactively having discussions at a policy level, a political level around what they should do with the market. But the UK has a real opportunity to do something great to get a lot of patients. The legislation itself can facilitate that, but we're struggling. Like the patient numbers just aren't quite where they were, and something Rifhat and I have talked about a lot. Like there's a real significant challenge in the UK as to how does the medical market not only defeat, that's quite a strong word there, I appreciate, but like defeat the illicit market and move consumers from the illicit market to the legal market. That's problem number one. That's a complex problem. And then problem number two is how does it position itself for the group outs for the, I guess, like non-traditional cannabis using cohort, people that have, you know, that don't have any real issue with the word cannabis or cannabis as a flower, as a medicine, as a drug in many forms. How does the market engage them and bring them on board? And I think despite lots of good work being done and lots of smart people doing sensible things, it's not quite hit the numbers that many people want it to. Patients, investors, people, you know, politicians. It's not quite there. So I guess what me and Rifhat have been talking about the past few months is what does the sector kind of do about that? And not only politically, what needs to happen there? Like, you know, you look at the MPs that have supported this for a long time, many years, who are now in positions of power and positions of influence. Some of them I've taken to Canada and shown, I've literally walked them into cannabis shops with BBC film crews. Those MPs are now in very influential positions. What do they do? But what does the sector also do to respond to some of these challenges? And there are some hurdles. You know, there are some issues that over the past month that have been talked about in the UK. The MHRA are looking at the sector for sure and have some concerns around what the sector is currently doing, which is a problem. And yeah, we've all got to do something about that. We've got to start having a sensible, smart, intellectual, nuanced conversation around what the UK market does. Because what we've been doing today it's a start, but it's certainly not filled its potential.
Yeah.
But there was something sorry, go on, Chris.
No, it's fine. I was just gonna comment, you know, I think every country has their own nuance, of course, in the challenges, but the issues are almost always the same, right?
Yeah.
How do you kill off a black market that's been entrenched forever, and frankly, oftentimes, depending on where you're at, has either equal quality product or slightly better, depending on who you're talking to, at lower prices, right? Like it's fairly straightforward economics 101. And then being able to get past the stigma discussions and creating the supply chains. I often tell people it's quite easy if you look at it from an academic perspective. It's the reality of our human nature that mucks it all up in the middle. So, and I mean, this is true everywhere. It's true here in the discussions I'm having in Peru with folks as they move forward. Certainly the United States has taken it to a whole new level of dysfunction. And so at least I do see what's happening in the UK oftentimes as pragmatic, but at least, and slow, but at least it's moving forward in some form or fashion. But Rifhat, what were you going to say?
Well, I think there was something really interesting about sort of when me and Paul had met. There was, you know, Paul works with various different agencies and has this whole pool of information around sort of data and insights, and it's sort of taking that and looking at the market, how it is at the moment, certainly. And I think there seems to be this no criticism, because I think everybody in this industry is trying to make things, it's a very new industry. You know, I worked in fashion where there's a lot of givens in terms of brand and how that looks. And certainly in cannabis, it's such a new industry. So you have this industry that's been set up with all of these different nuances and regulations that sort of and a lot of new people in the industry. So it's a difficult industry to navigate. And so certainly when me and Paul met, there was all this data and insights. And then I was looking at things, you know, commercially. You know, one of the things for me that was really important, my frustration was this 30,000. I think there's 30,000 patients today. I heard there's 50,000, but that's the whole thing aside. But why are the patient numbers not growing? And, you know, we have this 1.6 million patients that are using cannabis illicitly. And so what are the things that are not happening in the industry? And I really looked at it because my background is, you know, ideation, product development, supply chain, you know, that customer, that brand. And I was really looking at it, not to put medical cannabis patients into that sort of brand or consumers, but had to look at it that way because it was like, what do the patients want?
Yep.
And looking at those patients throughout that whole journey, just even from ideation, product development, how they use websites, all of those little things. And I didn't really feel, I think because everybody's experts in their own areas, and they would really sort of quickly trying to, such a new and it was such an exciting market. Everybody was trying to, you know, do things, and it all happened so quickly. And so me and Paul talked about sort of stepping back and using all this data and insights, and how do we, you know, my passion project is for patients to be able to have access, and this is why I'm part of the All Parliamentary Group. How do we create wider access for patients? So that's sort of how we started working together. It's like, how do we help businesses? Because that's the only way this industry will grow and help everybody. That's sort of my interruption.
Yeah. So Paul, as you guys have worked together, where do you see the biggest block? Like what have you guys unsurfaced, you know, revealed that said, okay, this is the problem, or unfortunately, is it multiple problems throughout the supply chain?
Yeah, it's for sure multiple. I mean, the biggest, yeah, there are many. There's probably like 10, 12 challenges that the market faces. And a lot of people, when they answer this question, they go awareness. They go, it's awareness. There's not enough people know. And if we just increase the number of people that know, then that's the first barrier to overcome it. And there's definitely some truth in that. If you think about how, I remember running not running the campaign on my own, there was a whole bunch of us working on the campaign, but I remember, you know, being part of that campaign in 2018, and it just happened in a flash. It was so quick. So literally within 2 weeks, the UK government had decided to legalise cannabis for medical use, which is the biggest, most progressive piece of drug reform since the Misuse of Drugs Act was implemented in like 75. So it's a huge change and shift. In fact, the government's only intervention since that Misuse of Drugs Act has been to reclassify cannabis as a Class B drug from a Class C. It was Class C, and then Gordon Brown made it Class B. So suddenly the government had you know, wow, progressive piece of drug policy reform. But if you compare that to like North America, Germany, loads of jurisdictions, the public are gradually brought on board and made aware of the pending legislation by government discussion and intervention. Like, look at Canada. Trudeau was talking about it for ages. Like, no one in Canada was like, we're legalizing cannabis? What the hell? Where did this come from? Whereas in the UK, and we've done focus groups, like have a patient database of hundreds and hundreds of patients who access the market in the UK, most legally with clinics, but others illicitly. We do market research for companies talking to those patients. And the responses we get back from saying, how did you find out about this, are wild. Like, because I worked on the campaign, I thought everybody knew, you know, oh, was that campaign, you know, even people that are like using the market found out about it a few months ago from a YouTube short that they saw or something else, you know, or they watched a Drewy's sharing video and were like, oh, I didn't realize that the market was legal. So yeah, there's definitely an awareness thing, but the biggest, and to answer that question full would take hours, but like the biggest challenge that we've had is the sector has just tried to answer that first barrier and only that barrier. And on the whole, we'll just increase awareness. Let's do as much marketing as we can. Let's like get out and speak to patients. But the overarching problem that the UK has that infiltrates all this discussion is that the UK illicit cannabis market is actually really good. It's very efficient. The cannabis is of a high quality. It's very easy to get. There are many Telegram groups that will have you cannabis through the door within 24 hours. So the legal market,
I think we just did another advertisement for the illicit market.
yeah, we're probably going to go
right?
to jail
That is
now.
the fundamental
Yeah.
challenge, right? It is easy to access, low price point, high quality. Always the challenge that the regulated market needs to fulfill, and oftentimes the politicians miss. And I had a question just culturally, because I love the nuances of culture and how they drive, market psychology. But if the UK had taken the approach of taking longer, educating people more that this is coming, do you ever think it would have gotten across the finish line, or would we still be talking about it? Because sometimes you just got to get it done. And my impression from the outside looking in is that, at least on the surface, the UK culture is fairly conservative. And so being able to move that over an extended period of time might have proven to be much more difficult. I don't know. It's just a thought.
I think there's cultural differences, but I also think there's other, in terms of the whole supply chain, the way it works, in terms of accessing product, the type of product. There's parts to the supply chain, not just stigma. That's one part of it, and that's what Paul was speaking about earlier. Bringing product into the UK is not easy, as it is with any other, and I know we were talking about, we've just advertised for the illicit market, but also for the medical market, products are so much safer. I know what I'm getting if I'm ordering off the medical market. There's a piece in itself. But I think awareness is, I almost think awareness is that sort of last piece of it. I think the foundation's not there. I think when, and you certainly wouldn't have this in any other industry where you legalize something or bring product to market where you don't know what the supply chain looks like, or it's a really difficult process to bring product in. When I order consumer products, when I used to work in buying, it's like really simple process. You'd get it in, your lead times are 10 to 12 weeks, you know what you're getting. And with medical cannabis, you need a letter of need. The shelf life is really short. And so by the time you can order, and because of the way cannabis is, it's a plant, it's grown. And so you have to get it through the supply chain. It comes in, there's a whole MHRA process which you need to adhere to. So all these policies have been set up for it to be this unique product, but there's so many rules and regulations around it. It hasn't really, in my mind, involved everybody in the supply chain right from the beginning. I think something we've spoken about for a while, and something we think about, is when the policy, when cannabis was legalized, it happened so quickly. These chain of all these processes in the supply chain and bringing product to market weren't really thought about. And so now it's a case of going back. And I think the awareness piece is there, but it's almost the marketing's always, for me, the last piece of it.
Yeah. And I think there's a challenge as well with this industry, because we keep calling it a new industry, but it's arguably at least 5,000 years old, right? So this is really a big reform project that we're having around the globe to restructure a quote unquote industry that has been around for thousands of years, is well established, has its own supply chain. And now we're saying, we're going to play with that because we want to now control it and tax it and do things with it that haven't been there in the past, all of which I'm supportive of, by the way. It's just, the realities of why I think we're looking at these types of supply chain issues, which, if you're starting up the internet boom, for example, and you're building all like that, had to be built from scratch in a fairly short period of time, and we built it on the fly. This one, we're restructuring something that's been there for a very, very long time. But we spend a lot of time talking about there's challenges, there's difficulties, we are going to work through each of these. What do each of you think the biggest opportunity is? Like, what's the good news story? We have 30,000, 50,000, tens of thousands of patients. We have lots of upside opportunity to be able to serve those patients. Certainly, you know, the hemp products and all that continue to be a discussion across the world and in all these different markets. So what's the good news story for folks that are trying to look at the UK as a viable market moving forward?
Like product innovation, I think is really interesting because again, I don't mean to take this back to barriers or challenges, but you're totally right that in the UK we're naturally quite conservative, and we have a market at the moment that is getting better and better by the month, and better equipped to serve that flower market, i.e. people that are used to consuming cannabis flower, people that are comfortable with consuming cannabis flower. The medical market is now a very viable option, and you see that from patient feedback. You see patients going, actually, this flower turned up on time, it was reasonably priced, and I had a good experience. So you have seen that start to shift, which is good news. But I think the UK will really come online, or the opportunity will be unlocked through product innovation. And I think the flower market is really interesting, and there's the legacy of the flower market, which is fascinating. As you said, it's a medicine that's been around for thousands and thousands of years, and we should never forget that. But I think for two things to happen in the UK, we need product innovation. I think for the medical cannabis to break out of the cohort of people that are used to using the plant or comfortable using the plant, I think we need to see that innovation. And also, I think if we want to help educate the UK population on cannabis-based medicines and move the whole conversation forward, we need to reframe how we think about cannabis, because it always comes down to stigma. Stigma is always an issue, but in a product innovation and development, I think is probably the best way to change that in the UK. And we are starting to see that now. There are companies that are bringing products to market and getting closer to bringing products to market, which will certainly change how people think about the medicine.
Yeah, I love the product innovation discussions, especially when also combined with the quality and safety discussions. And I have seen more of that combination in Europe and the UK than certainly I have in North America, where it's been a lot about brand innovation and product innovation, but everybody thinks about all the other important pieces like 10 months down the road as you're going to market, and it's marketing copy lines instead of valid structure. Not always for my friends with brands. I have plenty of great brands and companies that do this right, but at the federal level, certainly, and often at the state level, it's in those systems incumbent on the company to be responsible. And in Europe, it's much more regulated at the top level, which I can appreciate. The perfect system is probably somewhere in the middle as things move forward. But when you're thinking about those innovation sectors that you like the most, and that people are getting close to bringing things to market, what are those? What seems to come to mind where you go, oh, that's pretty neat? Those folks are really thinking at a high level about what the opportunity is.
Well, for me, I mean, I work in the pharma sector, and so I look at things slightly differently, although I've got the consumer background. And, you know, you talked about sort of where the opportunity is. Just going back a step, there's this 1.6 million illicit users. And what I've certainly seen in the industry is there's definitely some interesting work to be done around the marketing. And when I say that, it's that patient journey. And there's a whole cohort of patients that have different health stats. So they're not on the extremes, they're not on the fringes. There's people with, you know, women's health is certainly a big thing at the moment, and it, you know, there's marketing around that, but you see marketing veered in a particular direction, albeit great, but I think there's room for other ideas, innovation there. But in terms of product, you know, we can look at strain names. You know, if we want product to be considered a medication, that would be a really interesting place to start. If we want acceptance and we need to change stigma, you know, those are the steps before innovation, I think.
Yeah.
You know, agree innovation is key, but we've got a market at the moment which we're trying to sort of soften the edges at least, and make this flower acceptable. And then we have other sort of packaging we're using around marketing. Those are more important than innovation for me at the moment.
I just finished doing work on a branding project in Italy, and it's a really interesting space. Being by trade a marketer and brand strategy for decades, this stuff is fascinating to me because I think if you look at all of the sort of OG strain names, you're talking about a whole different era, right? It was meant to, it was sold on the street, primarily in the background, via now Telegram is the equivalent of that, and others. And now we still want to keep people who are existing patients and frankly used to that. We don't want to alienate those. At the same time, I don't think we want to go all the way to the pharmaceutical side, because then people don't believe that that's legitimate either. It's probably corrupted or messed up. Like, it is a challenge that pharma has to bridge that. But having just done a whole series of mind map exercises along this exact concept, it's fascinating to figure out the way to thread that needle. Like, how do you create a product that still stays true to the roots of cannabis, which is much about community health and recreation in some places, but as well as the legitimacy and the quality control and the sort of systematized process that people are looking for, and that certainly on the pharma side, they're looking for. And I can't tell you what we found, but we found some good stuff in the middle. After weeks of working through that kind of thing, you come up with these new brand iterations and new ideas for the future, which I think is fun as a marketer and what consumers need in order to sort of destigmatize things. Because if you're a 75-year-old grandmother living in the country and you want to take medical cannabis for some of your ailments, it's going to be a little bit hard for you to put something in your body called sour diesel, or something. Like, how do you deal with that? So I like the thinking, and I do think it's as much on us as an industry to position it for ease of uptake by consumers and patients as it is the industry itself.
And I think there's a really fine balance between sort of respecting the nature of the product, and it is a natural product which we know, while still sort of combining the needs of this pharmaceutical industry and market and changing people's minds, but it's that fine balance, because we do have two extremes at the moment. It's finding that place in the middle, and also looking at, you've done mind map, empathy mapping. It's looking at, where are your patients, which market exists in,
Yep. And what is triggering them? What is gonna be the thing that works for them, which frankly is exactly what marketing and brand has done across all these different industries for hundreds of years in different ways. There's I do tell people in cannabis, we're not all that unique. We got our own little struggles here, but in the end, like, it's all of the same issues if we can look at it through a lens of intellectual transparency, as opposed to bureaucratic and government hammer bashing. Trying to
just can I just jump in on the strain names thing? So I think that the strain names are obviously like a really relevant, interesting discussion. I think it will be relevant here in the UK based on sort of MHRA mumblings. But I do worry that I don't think in the UK that a strain name is a barrier to someone accessing them. I think there are bigger issues earlier on than that. I think it will definitely raise eyebrows at a clinical intervention if a clinician goes, I'm prescribing this, and they're like, sorry, come again, that is bizarre, that's a medicine. But I worry in the UK that this debate, and we're not like recreational markets, I think it's a little bit of a different conversation, and the marketing opportunities, it's a whole different kettle of fish. But here in the UK, I can see us going down this direction. I can see factions forming in the industry and tensions starting to come to the surface. I can sense already that it's going to be discussion for the all-party parliamentary group on cannabis, which for the, as Rifhat's mentioned, to which for the secretariat. I know these things are going to come to the surface. I have a slight concern that this is going to distract us as an industry from other things that we could focus on. That's not to take away the importance of conversation. I agree with you both in everything you've said.
Yep.
But I think that the UK's battle might be better fought elsewhere than strain names. And I also worry that because of this strain name discussion, we're going to see companies pushing it even further. And there are, Rifhat and I have had many conversations, deep dive into what some companies are doing for their market strategies and what some companies are not doing. And there are absolutely some companies taking quite significant risks and just in full breach of regulations, because they're going, well, why not? We're going to push it and we're going to do what we're going to do. And I think the strain name conversation is just going to put a lot of petrol on that fire and push people in two different directions.
Yeah, and fortunately, I think the strain name discussion actually sort of solves itself over time if you let market demand and supply take over, right? Because people will test and learn into product names, and those product names that resonate strongly with the targeted patient groups or targeted consumer audiences will rise to the top, and those that won't will die off in terms of names. That's how it ultimately should be done in the marketing and brand space, while the fundamentals of the market around quality and cannabinoid mix and how that all works in terms of each individual's bodies is much more relevant at the product level. So I think I agree with you both. Like, let's let market demand take care of those things, as long as it's not a complete breach of intellectual property rights, which frankly has been a problem in the States for a long time, and confuses the issue even more. If you're lifting Hershey's or Doritos or any of those names and selling them as black market products, obviously that's an issue. But yeah, I agree that there are bigger fish to fry at the base level, and then this will phase out over time. So as we look towards the next 3 or 4 years, you guys, and we get towards the end of our time here, what do you, I know we've spent a fair amount of time talking about the challenges, which is exactly sort of where the focus needs to be, and how do we break those down? But I do have quite a lot of confidence, as I've watched the UK market over the last several years continue to progress, continue to move forward, that will continue to happen. Where do you see sort of the break point happening, where it goes from these rather slow patient numbers and slow growth into sort of the more, I don't know if it'll ever look like a hockey stick, we can all hope that it does at some point, but where do we think that break line happens, where we've broken down enough barriers that now we can really see some larger scale growth, either on the consumer side or the patient side?
I think the biggest change we'd need to see in the UK, Paul, you might have different views, we've spoken about this before loosely, but doctors being able to prescribe in the UK, I think that will be the biggest. I think there's challenges within businesses.
They can prescribe already, right?
Sorry, GPs.
A GP.
GP. At the moment, you can only have a specialist consultant be able to prescribe. So I think that will sort of change things. That's sort of the biggest change I see. But I know we said we're not going to talk about challenges, but this is quite interesting in terms of there's a lot of patient acquisition, but it's keeping those patients within your business. From a commercial point of view, I think that's really, really important, because at the moment what you have in the UK is patients moving from, I'm slightly veered off the question, but in terms of growth and how we get there, it's acquiring patients is one part of the puzzle. But the next piece would be, how do you keep those patients on board? And again, going back to that patient journey, mapping out sort of what's important to these patients. But I think doctors, going back to your original point, doctors would be for me. Paul?
Yeah, well, and having worked with a lot of doctors, researchers, scientists over the years, I tell people I was trained well because my father was a nuclear physicist, and he and I always saw things very differently. And I always used to tell him, look, at the end of the day, Dad, you got to figure out how to take what you're saying and make it understandable and followable for the rest of us. And I think that often is not lost on physicians and doctors, but they're very much focused on, here is what's the ailment, what's the treatment. They don't want to spend a lot of time on, all right, how do I get you to come to me with your ailment and then keep coming and repeat? Like, that part of the business is not their favorite thing. And so I think there's opportunity, you know, as ancillary service providers to help educate doctors on how they can, you know, continue to do that as well. But did you have any, you know, thing to add on this point, Paul?
I agree with Riff that GP prescribing would play a major role and certainly get us in line with many other jurisdictions that have seen quite rapid or satisfactory market growth. I think that hopefully in the next couple of years, a company does get it right in terms of the supply chain and can meet patient demand adequately, because there are lots of people trying and there are lots of interesting ideas, there are lots of interesting strains coming to market, but the patient journey is still very clunky. And to survive in the UK at the moment and to maintain a top 5 clinic spot, something I look at a lot, to what the top 5 performing clinics and why, like, it requires a lot of cash burn. It requires a lot of dedication. You've got to be in it for the long run. And I hope that in the next few years, those companies that are currently able to maintain that and sit in the top 5 can develop a supply chain which meets the UK's patient demand. But I think it is a lot harder than even people in the well, maybe not people in the industry, but people who enter the industry, they perceive it to be. I think it's a very challenging market. It does require quite sensitive management and engagement of how you build a brand and how you engage a brand. But there are lots of people trying lots of interesting and different things. So hopefully in the next 2 years, some of those kick off and come into fruition. But I've put the days behind me where I make big bold claims, because 4 years ago I said we'd legalize cannabis medical for recreational use within 5 to 10 years, and now I don't think we're 5 years closer to that. So I avoid big bold claims and things.
I think there's something really interesting about sort of doctors being able to prescribe, because clinics in the UK, and this is why it's so challenging for clinics, because there's really hard costs attached to running a clinic. So if you've got a specialist doctor or an anaesthetist or a pain specialist, those costs super high. And then you can run in, you know, that break-even point for a business before you start to turn over money, because the margins are so low on the cannabis, you know, and there's such structure around, especially in the UK with the CQC. There's so many different layers to running a clinic in the UK, which is not as straightforward as just running, you know, a wellness clinic, or this is medical cannabis. So there's lots of rules and regulations and people you have to have in place. And I think having GPs would certainly change that, because that would bring down the cost, certainly, of the clinics, and there'd be a more sustained approach, sort of, for clinics' longevity, and they're not always chasing their tail. So I think that's really important. There's no getting away from those hard costs for a clinic at the moment, which is tough.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. And, you know, to wrap this up, what I can hope, Paul, is that what will happen with the system there is the same thing that happened before, which is all of a sudden, one day we wake up and we go, oh, we didn't see that coming, and yet it's done. Because maybe I do think that market forces are having a lot of influence currently on each individual country. And, you know, if we can get that doctor problem fixed, then hopefully we can very quickly see the UK, Germany, Spain, Italy, France, Czech, Poland, all these places that are moving along start to go, this is absolutely ridiculous. Let's just do it. you know.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm going to try and get a Labour front bench politician on a cannabis prescription. That's my backup plan if that doesn't.
There you go.
Having consumed medical cannabis in the House of Parliament, I think that would maybe help move things along somewhat.
Be interesting.
That,
There's a challenge.
that would be great. And yeah, these things will happen, and they always happen at varying rates. Sometimes you have to go slow to go fast, right? And I mean, it's cliche, but I also think that it's real in this case. And there's so many dominoes stacking in our favor to fall fast. The more I travel around the world, the more hope I have for each of these individual markets, because just globally, the awareness and the market movements and the acceleration and the multinational and multi-continental trade that is rising will become not only a cannabis and a medicinal, but a global economic force that can't be denied. And these governments are going to want to be a part of it. So, you know, guys, I really appreciate you joining us today. This has been a great conversation to have. And as things continue to move and change, we should do this again. And I hope you can both join us at some different GCNC events, whether they're in Europe or anywhere else around the world. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, having us on. A pleasure.
Thanks.
Absolutely. And to all of you out there listening, if you haven't subscribed yet, we're like 100 episodes in, for crying out loud. Just hit the button, do that, follow us and check us out. We're all pretty easy to find on all of the socials and LinkedIn. And until next time, everybody, keep fighting the good fight and helping to expand the global cannabis market ecosystem. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the GCNC Worldview podcast.